Have you ever walked into a place that should have been full of life, only to find absolute silence? Imagine arriving at a remote village after days of traveling through the frozen wilderness. You expect to hear voices, see smoke rising from chimneys, and find people preparing for another brutal Arctic winter. Instead, every home is empty. The fires have gone cold, meals appear to have been abandoned, and everyone is simply gone. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no footprints leading away, just an entire community that seems to have vanished without a trace. For nearly a century, this story has fascinated mystery enthusiasts around the world. Some believe it was one of the greatest unexplained appearances in history. Others argue it never happened at all. So, was an entire village really erased overnight? Or is this one of the greatest legends ever mistaken for history? Tonight, we're traveling deep into the Canadian Arctic to uncover the mystery of Lake Anjikuni. To understand this story, we first need to travel back to northern Canada in the early 20th century. This was a land unlike almost anywhere else on Earth. Thousands of square miles of frozen lakes, endless forests, and barren tundra stretched farther than the eye could see. During winter, temperatures could fall below minus 40 degrees Celsius. Snowstorms could isolate communities for weeks, sometimes months. In this harsh environment lived small Inuit communities. They survived by hunting, fishing, and following traditions that had been passed down for generations. Life was difficult, but these communities knew the land better than anyone. One of these settlements was said to be located near a remote body of water called Lake Anjikuni in what is now Nunavut, Canada. Because the region was so isolated, visitors were extremely rare. Only experienced trappers, traders, and hunters traveled through the area. One of them was a man named Joe Labelle. Labelle was an experienced fur trapper who had spent years navigating the Canadian wilderness. He knew many of the local communities and often stopped to trade supplies, rest, and exchange stories before continuing his journeys. According to the most famous version of the story, in November of 1930, Labelle was making another routine trip across the Arctic. After days of traveling through snow and freezing winds, he approached the familiar settlement near Lake Anjikuni. From a distance, everything seemed normal. The cabins were still standing. Nothing appeared damaged, but something felt wrong. There was no smoke rising from the chimneys, no dogs barking, no voices, no children playing outside. For a place that was usually alive with activity, the silence was unsettling. At first, Labelle assumed everyone was out hunting, but as he walked deeper into the settlement, the silence only became more disturbing. He called out. No one answered. He entered the first cabin, empty, then another, empty again, one after another. Every home appeared to have been abandoned. According to later reports, some meals were supposedly left unfinished. Personal belongings remained inside. Tools, clothing, and hunting equipment had not been taken. Items that would have been essential for survival in the Arctic were simply left behind. It didn't make sense. People living in one of the coldest places on Earth would never willingly leave without their supplies, especially not during winter. Yet there wasn't a single person to explain what had happened. As Labelle continued searching the village, the mystery only deepened. And what he would reportedly discover next would transform a strange encounter into one of the most famous and most controversial unsolved mysteries in Canadian history. As Joe Labelle searched deeper into the settlement, every new discovery raised even more questions. If the villagers had left voluntarily, why had they abandoned so many valuable possessions? In the Arctic, survival depended on preparation. Every tool, every weapon, every piece of clothing could mean the difference between life and death. Leaving without them would have been almost unthinkable. Yet according to the story, that's exactly what seemed to have happened. Label reportedly checked cabin after cabin, hoping to find someone, anyone, who could explain the silence. But every door led to the same unsettling sight. Empty homes, cold fireplaces, no signs of life. Then came one of the most chilling claims associated with the mystery. Some later accounts stated that the sled dogs belonging to the village were found dead, still tied to their posts. If true, this detail would be especially disturbing. These dogs weren't just animals, they were essential for transportation and survival in the Arctic. No experienced hunter would intentionally abandon them, especially with no food or shelter. Another claim suggested that supplies of food had been left behind. If the villagers had planned to relocate, they would almost certainly have taken as much food as possible. Carrying supplies was a matter of survival. So, why would they leave them behind? Nothing seemed logical. As the story spread over the following years, even stranger details began to emerge. Some versions claimed that several graves in the village cemetery had been opened and were completely empty. Others insisted that strange lights had been seen moving across the night sky shortly before the disappearance. These additions fueled endless speculation. Were they eyewitness accounts, or were they dramatic details added later to make the story even more mysterious? No one could say for certain. According to the traditional version of events, Joe LaBelle eventually made his way to the nearest telegraph station and reported what he had found to the authorities. The news spread quickly. The idea that an entire Arctic community had vanished without explanation captured people's imagination almost immediately. Newspapers began publishing sensational headlines. Readers were fascinated. How could dozens of people simply disappear from one of the harshest environments on Earth? And if something terrible had happened, where were the bodies? Search efforts were reportedly organized, but no clear answers emerged. No trail, no evidence of a large group traveling together, no obvious signs of violence, just questions. As the years passed, theories multiplied. Some believed the villagers had fled from an unknown natural disaster. Others suggested they had been attacked. Some imagined secret military operations, and inevitably, stories involving extraterrestrials began to appear. The more mysterious the tale became, the more people added their own explanations. But there's an important problem with almost every version of this story. Many of the most shocking details, the dead sled dogs, the open graves, the strange lights, do not appear consistently in the earliest reports. Instead, they become more elaborate as the decades go by. It's a pattern often seen with famous mysteries. A story begins with a simple claim. Then each retelling adds another strange detail. Then another, until separating fact from fiction becomes almost impossible. And that's exactly where the Lake Anjikuni mystery takes an unexpected turn. Because when modern historians began investigating the original evidence, they discovered that the greatest mystery might not be what happened to the villagers. It might be whether the disappearance happened at all. The investigation, theories, and conclusion. For decades, the story of Lake Anjikuni was accepted by many as one of the world's greatest unsolved mysteries. Books repeated it, magazines published it, radio programs told it. Eventually, it found its way onto television, documentaries, and later, the internet. With each new retelling, the mystery grew. But as researchers began digging into the original sources, they encountered a surprising problem. The evidence was remarkably thin. One of the first questions they asked was simple. Where did this story actually come from? The earliest widely known version appeared in newspapers during the 1930s. However, many historians noticed that the reports relied heavily on secondhand accounts rather than official investigation records. Researchers then searched for evidence that Canadian authorities had documented such an extraordinary event. After all, if an entire Inuit settlement had disappeared, it would have been one of the largest investigations in the country's history. But they found very little. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, often called the RCMP, stated that they had no official records confirming the disappearance of an entire village at Lake Anjikuni. They also disputed several of the most dramatic details that had become part of the legend. No verified reports confirmed dozens of abandoned homes. No official evidence supported the claims about open graves. And there were no reliable records of a massive search that uncovered an unexplained disappearance. This doesn't necessarily prove that Joe LaBelle never visited the area, nor does it prove that nothing unusual happened. Northern Canada in the 1930s was incredibly remote, and record-keeping was far from perfect. Small hunting camps often changed locations with the seasons. Families regularly moved to follow wildlife, weather conditions, and available resources. A settlement that appeared abandoned to one traveler might simply have relocated days or weeks earlier. So how did such an extraordinary story become famous around the world? One possibility is that a real event was gradually transformed through exaggeration. Perhaps LaBelle arrived at a seasonal camp after its residents had already moved on. Perhaps someone misunderstood what they saw. And over time, newspapers added dramatic details to attract readers. Another possibility is that the legend grew from local rumors, with each retelling becoming more mysterious than the last. It's something that has happened many times throughout history. A small mystery becomes a larger one. Then facts become mixed with assumptions. Eventually, the legend becomes more famous than the truth itself. Of course, not everyone accepts these skeptical explanations. Even today, some people believe the disappearance was real. They point to inconsistencies in historical records and argue that important evidence may have been lost or never documented. Others believe the truth was intentionally hidden. But despite decades of debate, no convincing evidence has emerged to prove that an entire village vanished overnight. And perhaps that's what makes the Lake Anjikuni mystery so fascinating. Unlike many unsolved cases, this mystery has two layers. The first question is obvious: what happened to the people? But the second question may be even more intriguing. Did the event happen in the way we've been told, or did a legend slowly replace reality? Sometimes the greatest mysteries aren't about missing people, they're about missing facts. In an age before the internet, stories could travel across continents, changing a little with every newspaper, every magazine, and every conversation. By the time historians tried to separate fact from fiction, the legend had already taken on a life of its own. So was Lake Anjikuni the site of one of history's strangest disappearances? Or is it a reminder of how easily myths can become accepted as truth? The answer may never be known. If you enjoyed this mystery and want to explore more forgotten cases, unexplained disappearances, and true stories that blur the line between history and legend, make sure to subscribe, because sometimes the most terrifying mysteries aren't the ones we can't explain. They're the ones we're not even sure ever happened. Thanks for watching.